everyone, welcome back to another video on my channel. Now, if you've been keeping up with my most recent uploads, then you will know that I recently read the Harry Potter series for the very first time. I created 7 reading vlogs, one for each of the books in the series, and I enjoyed making those reading vlogs so much. But it was mentioned a couple of times in some of the reading vlogs about me doing a wrap-up video at the end of the series so that we can have a place to go where my collective thoughts all come together. Now, I usually do reading wrap-ups on my channel anyway when I've got enough books to talk about. I figured that the best way that I could do a roundup this time is to tell you my thoughts about the series as a whole, give you some stats and some fun facts that you guys might want to know and that I've accumulated along the way. So that is what this video is going to be. Today we are going to do a reading wrap up of the entire Harry Potter series and my experience of reading it for the very first time. Something I am just going to mention because I'm not quite sure how this video is going to go, but this video may contain spoilers. For each of the reading vlogs I tried to film them without spoiling any bits of information for anyone who hasn't read the books, but this video is going to be a more casual chat, sit down, talk with you guys about my experience reading the series. Although, having said that, I didn't want to make this video and just continuously be repeating myself of what I said in the reading vlogs. If you get to the end of this wrap up video and there is something that you want to know that I didn't mention in the video, then feel free to leave it in the comments down below and I will be sure to get back to you. I'm just going to get into the video and let's see what we come up with. So once I finished reading the series, I put it back in its little case. These books are so difficult to get in and out of this case. I've now got to try and get them out of this case and they are in there pretty tight. So okay, I've got all of the books laid out so that now I can just pick them up as and when each book is relevant. So the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is a little recap of what rating I gave each of the books and how long each book took me to read. So going right back to the beginning of the series, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, I actually gave this book 4 stars and I read it in 2 days. However, the majority of this book I actually read on the 19th and the 20th, so I technically read the book within a 24-hour period. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets I ended up giving 3 stars and I read this over a 4-day period. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban I actually read over a period of 2 days. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire I actually gave 4 stars and I ended up reading it over a period of 6 days. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix I actually ended up giving 3 stars to and I ended up reading it over a period of 16 days. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince I actually gave 4 stars to and I ended up reading it over a period of 10 days. And the final book in the series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, I ended up giving 4 stars to and I ended up reading it over a period of 11 days. The books in the series that I actually read the fastest were Philosopher's Stone and Prisoner of Azkaban, and I read both of these in the space of 2 days. And it will be no surprise to you that Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix took me the longest to read. If you watched the reading vlogs, then you will know about my big book fear that I had to face when reading Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix. Something that I do just want to mention about my big book fear off of the back of finishing the series and these 2 books is I am so pleased with myself that I managed to read both of these books. It may have took me a little while to get through them, but I am very pleasantly surprised about my reading experience with both of these books, and something that has actually happened to me since finishing the series and acknowledging my big book fear is that I feel extremely positive about reading in general now. The idea of reading your average 300-400 page book seems so simple and easy to me now because I mean, this book alone was 800 pages. Like, now that I have finished reading the series and I have a better view of the series as a whole and I can think about my reading experience with each of the books individually, I actually do think that if I went back and read the series again, a couple of the books would have a different rating to what I originally gave them. The first book that I would change the rating of is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I originally gave it 4 stars, and I think I would actually go back and give it 5 stars. I had a really pleasant reading experience. This book had some of my favourite plots, it had some of my favourite characters, and even continuing reading on the series from this point, this book just stayed in my mind. It was constantly on my mind. I just had a really pleasant reading experience with this, so I probably would give it 5 stars. And the other book in the series that I would probably change the rating of, you might be pleasantly surprised about, but it is actually The Order of the Phoenix. I would change the rating of this book from 3 stars to 4 stars. The reason that I gave it 3 stars was simply because of my reading experience and my big book fear. However, thinking purely about the writing of the book, the plot, and my reading experience with that, I actually really enjoy the plot of this book. So before I go any further into this video and giving you stats and facts and information, I thought I could just give you my overall thoughts of my reading experience of the series as a whole. I have really enjoyed reading this series. I was actually a hell of a lot more pleasantly surprised when I got to the end of it than I thought I would be. I had an idea that I probably would have a pleasant reading experience with the series just because it has been so popular over the years, and I know a few people who really enjoy the books and the films, and I know, like, the reality of it is you don't get something that popular if it's not an enjoyable thing to engage with, if that makes any sense. One of my kind of fears going into it is I am not someone who typically picks up books to do with fantasy and magic, and obviously that is a hell of a big part in this series and in these books, so I really had no idea how I was going to feel reading that type of thing, but I was also very pleasantly surprised with that as well. Something that I like to have as a reader if I'm going to read a book that has a fantasy element, a magical element, is I like to be able to apply the book to real life, and I typically get along with the book a lot more if I can convince myself as a reader, like, yeah, this could happen in real life. If you've read this series, then you will know that there are definitely elements of this book that play into real life. It mentions non-magical people, it mentions the real world, there are aspects within the books that play out in real time. Even though the world is fictional, like where they live is fictional, the characters are fictional, it plays on real life aspects to tell you the story, and I think that that was the reason that I got on with this series so well, because in my mind, even though it's not a genre and the type of book that I would typically pick up, it was playing into my reading loves, which is being able to apply books to the real world. Having finished the series, I can definitely see why this franchise in general has been so popular over the years, particularly with a younger audience. I mean, obviously I'm now 28 and I've enjoyed reading the series, and I definitely think that adults can enjoy the series. I do not agree with these people who say it's for children, it's a children's book and adults shouldn't be reading it. Yes, they are marketed as children's books, but I definitely think because of the themes and how the books play out as the series progresses, adults can definitely get along with reading this series, and I'm an adult, I enjoyed reading it, so. But as I mentioned, I can definitely see why these books are very popular with people who read them when they were younger and have continued to read them or interact with the franchise as they've got older. I definitely think it's a franchise I will interact with more in the future. You know, maybe I'll watch the films. Now when I'm out and about and I see Harry Potter merch, I'm actually going to have some context and I'm going to know what it means. If you watched the Deathly Hallows reading vlog, then you will know that I've already kind of played into that a little bit. For my birthday, I bought myself some Harry Potter Lego. Obviously, I have no solid proof of this. I'm just going off of what other people have told me, the comments that I've had on the reading vlogs, and my own experience. I definitely think reading these books as an adult, you get a completely different experience to reading them as a child. Quite a few of the comments that I received on the reading vlogs were from people who had read them when they were younger and they were interested in what my reading experience was going to be. I think the common factor is it can be enjoyable whether you read them when you're younger or as an adult, but I think the differing factors is you see the plot points of the books completely different when you're an adult. Like, a few of the things that I figured out and the plot points that I picked up on whilst I was reading the books, I don't think I'd have picked up on them in the same way if I read these books as a child. I also don't think I'd have picked up on certain things if I read these books when they were being published, because obviously they were published a few years apart, whereas I read them within a few days of each other. So there were certain things that I don't think I'd have picked up on if I was reading them in real time. And being completely honest, I don't reread books all that much. However, I can definitely see me coming back to this series in the future. I actually have a fear of rereading books that I really enjoyed, because I get really worried that when I read them again, I'm not going to have that same pleasurable reading experience. Now, obviously this wrap up is in relation to the books, but I feel like I should mention the films. As I'm filming this video, I have not seen any of the Harry Potter films. I have not watched any of the films. A couple of my friends have been telling me that I should potentially watch the films, and a couple of you who commented on the reading vlogs have also told me that maybe I should consider interacting with the films in the future. Now, I have actually heard very mixed reviews about the films, and I think it depends on you as a person. If you're not so much as a reader, you might prefer the films. If you're a big reader, you might prefer the books. I would be interested in watching the films for the fact of kind of seeing it play out visually and seeing how that compares to my own ideas and how I've pictured it in my own mind. If I'm being completely honest, I am not in a rush to watch them, simply because I've had such an enjoyable reading experience with the series that as of right now, in this current moment, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything with not watching the films. The films were actually being shown on TV as I was reading this series, but I didn't want to interrupt my reading with the series by trying to watch the films at the same time. The next thing that I thought we could do in this video is I could give you some of my random facts and stats that I accumulated over the period of reading this series. I collected these facts and stats based on some comments that I received on the reading vlogs, and also some conversations that I had with people in my real life about the series. So these are all completely random, and they're just some fun things that I thought it would be nice to tell you in this wrap-up video. Starting off with my favourite and least favourite characters in the series. So my favourite character in the series, actually for some random reason, is Sirius Black. I have no idea why Sirius Black really stood out to me. As soon as Sirius was introduced into the series, I had an instant love of his character. When he died in the series, that was one of the deaths that really shocked me and took me back. And my least favourite character is not going to be a surprise to anyone, because I assume that this person is a lot of people's least favourite characters, and I feel like the intention is for this person to be an unlikable character, obviously, but it would be Professor Umbridge. The reason that I thought it was still worth mentioning that Umbridge is one of my least favourite characters is because even though I think the intention is for that to happen, I thought it was worth mentioning because even just reading her on the page irritated me. Reading how she spoke, reading the way that she spoke irritated me, so I thought it was worth mentioning that she is one of my least favourite characters, because I feel like the intention worked out and it played out. Another of my least favourite characters is actually Lockhart, Gilderoy Lockhart. Again, for the same purpose, reading about him on the page just irritated the life out of me. A couple of honorary mentions for my favourite characters. I really liked Hagrid. I really liked Professor McGonagall. I also really liked... who else did I really like? I actually kind of liked Luna. Then I guess we should have some honorary mentions for my least favourite characters. Some of you aren't going to like this, but I didn't really like the Weasley twins. Not in the sense of I think they're terrible characters, just in the sense of they didn't really resonate with me. I didn't really feel any kind of feeling towards them. Hate to say it, but in the side of some of my least favourite characters, I think I have to put Hermione Granger. Now, I just want to be clear. I don't dislike Hermione. She obviously plays a very key role in the series and how the plot plays out and all of that kind of stuff. I mentioned in, I think it was the Prisoner of Azkaban reading vlog, that I see a lot of myself in Hermione. We have a lot of differences, but we have a lot of similarities as well. And I think as a reader, because you can kind of see yourself in the character, it becomes quite annoying. She has the type of personality that if you knew someone like that in real life, they would annoy you most likely. A little bit of a fun stat that I thought I could share with you is my favourite and least favourite book covers of the series editions that I have. My favourite book cover, I think, has to go to Goblet of Fire. I don't know what it is about this book cover, but I really, really, really love the artwork on the front of this cover. And then for my least favourite book cover, I actually ended up having two because I just couldn't choose between them, and it is Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince. I think the reason that I don't really get on with the Order of the Phoenix book cover is because it seems pretty plain and dull. Like, all of the other covers have really standout features and they have colours that stand out together. This one is very monotoned and it just doesn't really work for me. And then for Half-Blood Prince, again, I just really don't get on with this cover. I don't like how dark it is, and I understand the reference of the image, but I don't know, it just doesn't really work for me. I thought that this would be like a little fun stat to share with you because I do not care what anyone says. We judge books by their covers. And I purposely picked this copy of the books because I really liked the covers. Whilst we're talking about books and their covers, something that I realised when I was filming the Deathly Hallows reading vlog, and I think it was when I was filming the outro, I'm not sure if this is an intentional choice, but I'm gonna say that it is. And I have a feeling it probably is, but I like that the fact that the first book and the last book have covers that work together. Obviously the illustrations on them and things are different, and they have different illustrations on the back in relation to the story. Getting into actual aspects of the books and the stories, I think my favourite of the spells is Lumos, and I know it's such a simple one, but I think that's why I like it. The fact that there's a spell that can just give you a little bit of light for when you need it. Some of my favourite kind of items that I mentioned throughout the series, I really like the idea of the Marauders map. I think that is something that I would, if this was all real, sorry to break it to you, but it's not. If this was all real, I think that is probably the item that I would really like to own. And I also really like the idea of the Pensieve. I really hope I'm saying this right because that was one of the things that I was worried about with these reading vlogs. I was really worried about my pronunciation of certain things, but no one's called me out for it, so I don't know if I would ever want to use it, but I like the idea of it. Some of my favourite sort of places and areas, I guess we would call it, one of them is Diagon Alley. I think if you read this series and you don't like Diagon Alley, I'd be kind of confused because I feel like it has its own kind of magic to it. You know, like there's something for everyone, so I feel like that's an area of the wizarding world that a lot of people would just get on with. And another is the Room of Requirement. Again, it's one of those places where I think it's just nice to know that it's there. sort of when you need it, I guess. I'm going to tell you some of my kind of random favourites of the series. So these are going to come at you in no particular order. My first kind of random favourite of the series is Lupin and Tonks. I don't really know why or what it is about them, but I really like them as a pairing. I liked that we were kind of getting to know them, and we were getting to know them as a couple a lot more. And then obviously I was very, very shocked to learn that they were killed in the battle. I mentioned this in one of the reading vlogs, I think, but I really like the idea of spellotape. The word just really pleases me. I also really like the idea of the Hogwarts Express and the fact that they get to Hogwarts by steam train. A family member of mine really liked steam trains, not the Hogwarts Express, but steam trains in general. So the fact that a steam train features in this series is really nice to me, and it's quite comforting. On a similar wavelength, Platform 9 3/4, I think it's such an interesting way to kind of get into the wizarding world. The idea that you can just be in a random train, well, it's not a random train station, is it, but in a regular train station is the word that I was looking for, and there's an entire wizarding world behind the wall. Kind of a funny one. One of my favourites is the night bus. Now, if I'm thinking about this in a realistic sense, and me as a real person, if I was living in this world, so me exactly as I am now, but in the wizarding world, I don't think I would get on with the night bus, because I get travel sick. So me and the night bus would really not go together. However, reading the series, the night bus is one of my favourite features of the wizarding world. A couple of my other favourites I've mentioned briefly, but Hagrid was one of my favourite characters. I feel like that is going to be quite common amongst people who have interacted with the series. He's quite easy to like, but he is a little bit frustrating at times. And then one of the characters that I was actually quite shocked that I had such a liking for as the series progressed, and particularly towards the end of the series, was actually Professor McGonagall. When the series first started and I was reading the first couple of books in the series, I didn't really have any kind of feeling or opinion about Professor McGonagall. She was just kind of there, and then as the series progressed further and we read more about her in the series, I just really started to like her. So yeah, Professor McGonagall would be one of my favourites of the series as well. And then the final favourite that I'm going to tell you about is the Mirror of Erised. So I actually really like the idea of this mirror and being able to look into it and see it. Again, I think it's one of the things that I like the idea of, but I don't know if I would necessarily like to use. But the idea of having it and it being there sounds really nice to me. So the next thing that I think we should do is go back to the predictions that I made in the reading vlogs and see how accurate I was. So hopefully you will have watched the reading vlogs, but if you didn't, I think it was in the reading vlog for Prisoner of Azkaban, I made some predictions of characters that I thought were not going to make it out of the series. They were either going to be defeated, killed, something was going to happen to them along the way. Now, I did mention in that reading vlog that obviously I was making these predictions quite early on in the series, and there was a chance that there were going to be characters that I hadn't even met yet that this was going to apply to, but I didn't know them. I hadn't met them. So I'm going to start with the ones that I mentioned in my predictions and that I actually guessed correct. So starting off the list were two that I actually knew happened in the series. I just didn't know when they happened or how they happened, and that was Dobby and Dumbledore. However, I think the death of Dobby actually did kind of take me back a little bit, and not so much for Dobby dying, because same as I said, I knew it was going to happen at some point. It was actually how it came about. The fact that he died trying to help them just kind of really took me back, because that's really key to his character. I actually made the prediction that one of the Weasley twins was gonna die in the series. I didn't know which one. I didn't really have a preference for which one. But my logic for this was, originally I said that one of the Weasleys was gonna die. And I was trying to work out which one I thought it was, and by process of elimination I just came down to the twins. And originally I was like, okay, the twins are gonna be my prediction, and then I thought, is it really gonna have an impact if both of them die? I don't think so. So I feel like because they're twins, it's gonna make more sense that it's gonna be one of them rather than both of them, because then the idea that one of the twins has to go on without the other one. Another prediction I didn't actually make, I believe, when I mentioned my list of predictions, but I did predict in one of the other reading vlogs, I think, and it was Cedric Diggory. Again, this was one that didn't really come as a surprise to me, in the sense of, in the book he was being hyped up to be this like amazing Quidditch player, and you know, like all the girls fancy him and like all of this type of idea, and that to me screamed that something had to happen to him. I didn't necessarily know if he was actually gonna die in the series, but I knew that something was gonna happen to him, and when the Triwizard Tournament was happening and he was picked out to take part, I just knew, I was like, this is going to be the end for him. You know, the Triwizard Tournament hadn't happened for a while because bad things kept happening. He was being made out to be this really incredible player, and then he was picked out for the tournament, and I just knew something bad was going to happen at this tournament, and it had to be to him. I also said that I thought that some of the pets weren't going to make it out. I originally said that I thought it was going to be because, you know, pets don't live forever. The death of Hedwig was actually a little bit shocking to me, even though I said that I didn't think the pets were going to make it out of the series. Again, I think it's because of the way that it happened. And then the final two that were actually on my list of predictions that I got correct were actually Snape and Voldemort. I said for Voldemort that I didn't know whether he was actually going to be killed or if he was just going to be kind of defeated. You know, we see it in books where the enemy is defeated and they run away and everyone lives happily ever after. So I didn't know if he was actually going to be killed or if he was just going to be defeated. And then the prediction of Snape, I actually forgot that I put Snape on the list, and then when Snape actually died, I was shocked. So even though originally I was like, okay, I feel like he might be on the list, it still came as just as much of a shock to me when it actually happened. So now for a couple of characters that were killed in the series that were not on my list, and some of these are because I hadn't heard of the character at this point when I made the predictions, and then some of them were just, I just didn't see it coming. So the first one is Sirius Black. At this point in the series, I don't think we'd really heard much about Sirius Black, and I'm pretty sure he was still in Azkaban at this point. His death really took me by surprise and was one of the more prominent deaths in the series, especially because he's one of my favourite characters in the series. Colin Creevey actually again was another one that I didn't really see coming. He was a little bit of an annoying character to me, but it was a little bit sad when it did mention it in the final book. And again, same with Lupin and Tonks. I think at the point of me making these predictions, we hadn't really heard about them as characters, so they didn't make it onto my list. But towards the end of the series, I feel like I was kind of rooting for them a little bit more. And then, you know, the plaster was ripped off. So now I'm going to tell you my ranking of the books from my favourite to least favourite. Actually, we'll do it from my least favourite to my favourite. This ranking is going to be in terms of what I enjoyed the most and what I enjoyed the least. Before I tell you my ranking, I just want to make it clear that I actually enjoyed all of these books in the series. I didn't dislike any of the books, and I would read all of these books again. So coming in at 7th place on the ranking list is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Same as I mentioned, I don't think that this is a bad book. I just think that of the books in the series, this is my least favourite. It has the lowest rating of all of the books in the series by me, and I definitely felt like this felt like a filler book, I'm going to call it, which is the plot plays a role, the book plays a role, but as a reader it just feels like I'm kind of just progressing. I'm not really getting all that much from it. I'm actually going to change the next 2 books around. Coming in at 6th place is Goblet of Fire. Again, it's one of the books that I had the most kind of pleasurable reading experience with. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the plot. It has some of my favourite plot points. And I feel like this was the book that we were kind of really getting into the kind of gritty elements of the series. But again, of the books in the series, it's probably one of the ones that I would reach for the least. The book that I changed it with and the book that makes it into 5th place is, ironically, the 5th book in the series, Order of the Phoenix. I felt like this book deserved to be bumped up into 5th place from 6th place because the sole reason that I have a dislike for this book is the length of it. But the plot, the characters, the reading experience, it sits a lot higher than I'm giving it credit for, so I have to bump this up to 5th place. Coming in 4th place is actually where we started out, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Obviously the first book in the series. I just had such a pleasurable reading experience with this book. I think it's a really nice way to start off the series. It starts off the series really well, and I would definitely pick this book up. I was going to say on a regular basis. Not on a regular basis, but I would definitely pick this book up again. In 3rd place is Deathly Hallows. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about the end of the series. I had this fear that I was going to get to the end and it was just going to fall flat, and it definitely didn't do that for me. This earns 3rd place because there were actually some plot points in this book that I just did not see coming. The plot about Draco, the Elder Wand, and how all of that played out, I really did not see it coming. So this book gets bumped up to 3rd place purely for that reason. There's 2 books left. What order do you think they're going to come at you in? I think it's pretty obvious because I've skirted around it for the majority of this video so far. But in 2nd place is Half-Blood Prince. Again, this book has some of my favourite plot points of the series, and I actually guessed who the Half-Blood Prince was, and if I remember correctly, I actually guessed it pretty quick. The reason that I managed to figure out that Snape is the Half-Blood Prince is actually something that I personally thought was quite obvious, but because it felt so obvious, I started to doubt myself. I'm trying to remember all of this correct. He doesn't have his own supplies, so he gets told to use some of the ones from the store cupboard, and he uses this potions book in his potions lessons with Slughorn, I believe it is. And he's using this potions book, and it says that it is property of the Half-Blood Prince. I put 2 and 2 together that Snape used to be the potions teacher, and in this book he's actually the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Would Harry have had access to this book if Snape was still teaching potions? No, because we're 6 books into the series and we've never heard about it before. So my process of elimination told me that Snape had to be the Half-Blood Prince. Maybe the actual logic behind it is completely different to that, but as a reader, with the information that we were gave, that is how I managed to work out that Snape was the Half-Blood Prince. Which leaves us with only 1 book left, and my favourite book of the series has to go to Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The reason that I put this in 1st place is because I just remember having the most pleasurable reading experience with this book. I had some amazing reading experiences with all of these books in the series, but there was just something about this book that kept it in the forefront of my mind for such a long time. So it earns itself the number 1 spot. But I will say that I am very torn when talking about Prisoner of Azkaban and Half-Blood Prince, because I think if there's any book that's going to rival this one for first place, it would be Half-Blood Prince. I do have to mention the epilogue, my thoughts about it. I didn't write this in my notes, so I'm kind of just winging this part, but it kind of came to my mind. I really like that the epilogue is included, and I think it's quite interesting, the point in the story that you are jumped forward to, because I think there's quite a few points that J.K. Rowling could have chose to jump forward to and to tell you about, and the fact that she chose that particular moment in time, I think, is quite an interesting point for her to give us as readers. I also like that the epilogue was included because I like the idea that when you're reading this series, you know exactly what J.K. Rowling is thinking. Not to a pinpoint, but in the sense of the fact that she included where some of these characters are all of these years later kind of tells me as a reader that she's also thought about where these characters are at this particular moment in time, obviously. And I also thought this with the introduction chapter in Philosopher's Stone, which, you know, it stands as part of the book as a whole, but the chapter The Boy Who Lived I thought was really interesting to start the book off. The book starts off with you being introduced to Harry being dropped off in Privet Drive. He's still a baby, his parents have just died, and then when you get into chapter 2, you jump forward 10 years in time. So it kind of plays a similar role where there's these jumps in time, and I kind of like that you start off with a jump in time and you end with a jump in time, because it really gives this idea that, you know, there has been thought put into not only the years of Harry at Hogwarts, but where he was before and where he is afterwards. So I actually received a couple of comments throughout me reading the series, both from people in my real life and comments on the reading vlogs, when I mentioned different ideas and plot points, and people said, how have you figured that out? And there are 3 that come to mind that I thought I could share with you and share kind of how I figured it out. But before I tell you, there are a couple of things that I just want to mention. Number 1 is I definitely agree with what people have said, that if I was reading these books as a child, I probably would not have figured these things out. I also definitely think that the fact that I was reading these books so close together played a part in that. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, then be sure to go and watch the reading vlogs, because you will see in those that I kind of gave my thoughts and theories of what I thought was going to happen. I am not for a single second saying that this is how it was meant to be. I'm not saying that if you get this point and put them together, you come up with the answer and that's what J.K. Rowling intended. She might not have intended for it to be that way. It's just that these are the points that I picked up on in the plot and the story in the books, and it led me to come up with the theory, which ended up being correct. So the first one is the Half-Blood Prince and Snape being the Half-Blood Prince. I'm going to skim over this one very quickly because I have already mentioned it in this video, but I figured out that Snape was going to be the Half-Blood Prince because of Harry using the potions book when Slughorn was teaching potions. Originally, Snape was teaching potions. He really wanted to be the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, but never got the opportunity. And when Slughorn came to work at Hogwarts again, it kind of suggested that he was going to be the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. However, he wasn't. He actually went in to teach potions, and Snape had become the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. And now that Snape wasn't teaching potions, we learn about this potions book that the Half-Blood Prince has been writing in. My brain put 2 and 2 together that if Snape was still teaching potions, Harry would not have had access to this book, most likely, because we had not heard about it throughout the entire series. So the annotations in this book had to come from Snape, which meant that Snape had to be the Half-Blood Prince. The second one I didn't actually figure out as obviously. I actually figured it out without realising I'd figured it out, because I actually mentioned in the reading vlog that this is what I thought had happened, but I didn't say it for certain. I just kind of skimmed over it, and then when it actually came out, I realised that I'd actually mentioned it. Snape put the sword at the bottom of the lake. The reason that I managed to figure this out, even though I didn't kind of be like, I know that Snape's put it at the bottom of the lake. When Bellatrix discovered that Harry had the sword, she questioned how he had it because it was put in the vault at Gringotts, and I was umming and ahhing whether it was the real sword, the fake sword, and when she was talking about it being put into the vault at Gringotts, she mentioned that Snape had been involved with it, and I said, so Snape knows that the sword exists. Snape knows that it's out there, whether it's real or fake. So the fact that Snape knows of the existence of this sword, does that mean that he could have played a role in the fact that the sword was at the bottom of the lake? Obviously, when you hear about the sword being at the bottom of the lake, there is the Patronus, the silver dome. When we're actually reading about the sword being at the bottom of the lake, the only thing we have to go off is the silver dome, and when that was mentioned, I kind of tried to think if I'd heard of anyone's Patronus being that. I had a few theories of who I thought it could have been at that point, but I couldn't quite work out why they would have access to the sword and why they would want to put it at the bottom of the lake, and I was kind of 50-50. I had a few people in mind who would want to help Harry and would put the sword at the bottom of the lake, but I couldn't work out how they would have access to it. And then on the flip side, I had theories of a few people who would have access to the sword, but they wouldn't necessarily want to help. Progressing on further in the book, it is mentioned that Snape's Patronus is a silver doe, and in that moment I was like, Snape put the sword at the bottom of the lake. So with this theory, I kind of said, could Snape have put it at the bottom of the lake, but I was not certain on it at all. And then the final one that I feel like I have to mention, and is a bit more obvious, and I feel like I explained this one a bit more in the reading vlog, it is the fact that there are 7 Horcruxes and Harry is one of them. This one I actually figured out, I believe, a book before it's actually explained that Harry is the 7th Horcrux. It's explained to us that Harry is the 7th Horcrux in Deathly Hallows, I believe, but the idea of the Horcruxes actually is introduced to us in Half-Blood Prince. It tells you what a Horcrux is, how it comes about, all of this kind of stuff. I'm obviously not remembering this word for word, so this is just a generalised explanation. In order to get a Horcrux, a death has to take place, and as soon as it mentioned that Horcruxes come about because of a death, the first thing that came to my mind were James and Lily Potter dying. So at this point I was running on the idea of 2 people died, could that be 2 potential Horcruxes that have been made? He got the lightning bolt scar on his forehead, and his scar burns whenever Voldemort feels some type of way. He also can see into Voldemort's thoughts, and you know, he kind of has like the visions of what Voldemort is seeing and feeling. It was also mentioned when talking about the Horcruxes that they believed that Voldemort will have made 6 Horcruxes. However, in the memory we see that Voldemort is talking about this magic number 7. So in my mind then, I was pretty certain that this was where the plot was going. We were being led to believe there would be 6, but this magical number 7 was going to play a key role. And I was convinced that there were going to be 7 Horcruxes. So putting all of that information together, Horcruxes are made when deaths occur. Harry's parents died. Voldemort tried to kill Harry. It didn't work. He ended up with this scar. Harry had to be the 7th Horcrux. And that is why he was having all of these thoughts and feelings that Voldemort was also experiencing, and he was getting these insights into how Voldemort was feeling and what he was doing. I wasn't sure whether he was gonna always live with the part of Voldemort in his scar or if it was gonna be completely gotten rid of. So that bit didn't come to me until much later, probably towards the end of the last book. So that is kind of how I came about with those 3 theories, and giving you a bit of an insight into how I kind of put the information together. As I mentioned, if I had been reading these books as a child, or if I'd been reading them further apart, I really don't think I would have put 2 and 2 together the way that I did reading this series now. But yeah, reading them as a 28-year-old and reading them all within a month of each other, it allowed me to kind of figure these things out. One of the ones that I think I mentioned in one of the reading vlogs, I can't remember which book it appears in, but when there is mention of a girl holding some scales and Harry, Ron and Hermione walk past her, she drops these scales, they help fix these scales, and they carry on their day with no eyelashes battered. I had a feeling that this girl was gonna come back to play in the plot in some way. I didn't quite know how, and I didn't know what significance she was gonna play, but I had a feeling that a girl holding some scales just seemed so random that in actual fact it wasn't going to be as random as it seemed, and it came back to play out that Draco Malfoy was changing Crabbe and Goyle into girls in order to sneak around. So that was definitely an interesting part of my reading experience with the series. And I definitely think if you pick up on the idea that nothing is mentioned in these books on accident, then it can be quite a fun way to read the series and kind of try and pick out information that you think is going to come back at the end of each of the books. And maybe each of the things weren't mentioned in order to be figured out the way that I figured them out. They're still there, and it's still fun to be like, okay, I think this is going to play a part in it. I think this probably has some significance. This seems like it wouldn't be significant, but I think that it might be. It's quite a fun way to kind of interact with the series. So now the final thing that I'm going to talk to you about in this video is I'm going to address some questions and comments that were left on the reading vlogs. I am not actually going to be reading directly from the comments of the reading vlogs. Instead, what I've done is I've gone back through all of the comments that were left on all of the reading vlogs, and I have picked out points and questions that occurred that I think people will want to know the answer to. Something that was mentioned a couple of times were people wanting to know my thoughts about the three main characters. With Harry Potter, originally I didn't really have any feeling towards him. He was just the main character, he was the person who this entire series was about. Didn't really feel anything. Towards the end of the series, I actually started to dislike him a little bit. His teenage hormones kicked in, and you know, he's got the entire world against him. He was acting in a way that would be predictable under that situation. As a reader, I didn't really have much feeling towards him. Hermione Granger got on my nerves throughout the entire series, and I definitely think it plays into the fact that I see a little bit of myself in Hermione. Not completely, but there are just a couple of things about her that I can relate to and I can see in myself. With Ron, I really like him as a character. Like, out of the three of them, I think he's my favourite, but I wouldn't like to think that I was relying on him, and he also can be a little bit annoying at times. The jealousy that he feels towards Harry sometimes is a little bit irritating. But on a general sense, he is my favourite of the three, and a lot of the time I did find him quite funny, but that's because he's quite easy to find funny. Like, his humour and his wit are the kind of humour and wit that I think a lot of people will find funny. There were a couple of comments in relation to how do I feel about the Dursleys. I don't like them, and I think that is how a lot of people are going to feel. I feel like even under all of the circumstances, getting all the way through the series, they still don't have reason to treat Harry how they do. There is an element of jealousy, and there is that element of like, if I can't have it, neither can you. You know, it was the idea that he was just an inconvenience to them. And instead of it being like, this is my sister's child and I'm gonna take care of him and protect him how she would want me to, he's just an inconvenience, and I'm slightly jealous that he gets to go to the wizarding school that I wanted to go to but wasn't allowed to. I was asked on a couple of occasions in the comments about my thoughts relating to the films, and I've already addressed this a little bit, so I'm just going to skim over this one. I would be open to the idea of watching the films. I'm not in a rush to watch them. I'm pretty satisfied with my reading experience of the books. A lot of people wanted to know my thoughts on Hogwarts and life at Hogwarts and how all of that kind of plays out. This is where my thoughts and feelings are probably going to become a little bit controversial. Hear me out. If we're talking about it from a real life perspective, so literally just this is a series of books and this is my experience reading them, I really like the idea of Hogwarts, I like the idea of the magic world, Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley, all of the magical elements. I actually really liked them. The controversial opinion might be that if we take it as this is a magical world that at 11 years old you can go and live in and you can interact with, I actually don't think I would want to. I actually don't think, like, if this was all real and at 11 years old we received letters, keep me as a muggle. Like, I would not want to go. I feel like living at Hogwarts and experiencing all that that school has to offer, I would not sleep. It just would not be the place for me. At 11, receiving the letter, I would probably be very excited, but the reality of it I just would not cope. So as a concept, great. If it was reality, don't think I would really get on with it. Off the back of that, I was also asked, and I saw a few comments that kind of skimmed over like different elements to do with the magical world, so I thought I would just include those as well. So if I was to go to Hogwarts, I definitely think that the pet that I would take, I'd be a Hermione Granger and I would have a cat. Me and Twinny would be off to Hogwarts. Ginge would really hate Hogwarts, but Twinny would really love it, because Twinny has such like an adventurous personality. It was mentioned a few times about different kind of classes, what subjects did I like the idea of, what subjects do I think I would enjoy learning. Again, going back to this theory of it, reality of it, the theory side of it and the kind of make-believe side of it, the idea of potions really appeals to me, because like the idea that you can make a potion and it can do all of these wild things that's a real magical element. The reality of it, when I'm applying that to the real world, the thing that comes to mind is like science class at school, and I hated science at school. I also think I would enjoy McGonagall's class. And I think that is probably the lesson and the subject that I would enjoy the most. Is it the subject that I would get my best grade in? Probably not. McGonagall's lesson I like in both aspects. I like the idea of it in a theory sense, and I like the idea of it in a reality sense, so I guess that is the one that I would go with. Which, is McGonagall's lesson Transfiguration? I think it is. If I was at Hogwarts, would I try out for Quidditch and would I want to play Quidditch? The answer is no. I hated PE at school. I have no interest in sport. I have no interest in Quidditch. I probably wouldn't even go and watch them play Quidditch, to be honest with you. I'd be off somewhere else. I don't know what I'd be doing, but I would be somewhere else. For the books, for the series, I think it's a really interesting concept that they have their own sport and it's completely different to any sport that you would get in the real world. Reality, I would not want to play it and I wouldn't want to watch it either. I would not be interested in it in the slightest, which again is probably a very controversial opinion. The final one that I cannot end this video without addressing is, what Hogwarts house do I think that I would be in? So starting off this series and having no knowledge of the series, the houses, I knew the names of them but I didn't really know anything about them. I said that I would like to be in Slytherin and my reasoning was very basic, which was green is my favourite colour. Like, I could be a Malfoy, look at my hair, like, you know, the blonde hair. Having read the series, developed an understanding for the houses, the characters, seeing which characters were sorted into which houses, which obviously give you a little bit of an idea of the types of people that would be in each house, I have come to accept that the Hogwarts house that I would probably be sorted into is Ravenclaw. Now, I don't know how I feel about that, but I have come to the realisation that I think of the Hogwarts houses, Ravenclaw is the most likely that I would be sorted into. I believe that you can do like a quiz or something to find out what Hogwarts house you're in, and I think one of my friends mentioned it to me. And overall, I would just like to say that I am actually really glad that I finally read this series. It does make me think, if I read these books as a child, would I have enjoyed them as much as I have? And I'm actually thinking that I wouldn't have, because magic was not in my reading interest, and I just don't think I would have enjoyed the concepts as much because it just didn't appeal to me. And I think if I'd have read them when it didn't appeal to me, I probably wouldn't have had as positive of a reading experience. Also, getting to engage with you guys on the reading vlogs has also been a very positive experience, so I just want to say a big thank you to anyone who has engaged with any of the reading vlogs. But that is it. That is going to be it for this wrap-up video, and this is going to be it for our experience with reading Harry Potter. I do plan to make more content in the future in relation to my reading. It obviously won't be Harry Potter related, but if you would like to stay up to date with my reading in the future, then be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I do plan on making more reading vlogs in the future, as I've really enjoyed making these ones. Harry Potter might appear on my social media again in the future. In October, I'm planning to do Vlogtober, which is where you vlog every day, and I haven't built my Lego yet, so maybe we can do a bit of that together in Vlogtober, so be sure to stick around for that if you would like to see that. Also, let me know if that's something that you would like, you know, should I let you guys know when I've built my Lego? I don't know. I really hope that you liked this video, and I hope that you liked the reading vlogs as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you liked it, and I shall see you again in my next video. Bye guys!